Morning, everyone. Good morning. This is a panel, I think. Like, you want me to just moderate from up here by myself? Got these colleagues. These are the kind of colleagues say, yeah, I'm right behind you. Don't worry about it.
We thought you'd put on a better show.
I do these things all.
All right, good morning, everyone. We'll restart this. The name of this panel, or the topic, is Navigating Uncharted Seas. I'm not usually too high on nautical metaphors, because they tend to be things like adrift, unmoored, three sheets to the wind, which definitely does not apply to this panel. You have here today Chris Crane, who's President and CEO of Exelon Corporation, of course, from Chicago. Lots and lots of nuclear plants, one of our very best, if not our best operators. Tony Alexander, President and CEO of FirstEnergy Corporation, and Tom Fanning, who's Chairman, President, and CEO of Southern Company, obviously headquartered in Atlanta. And we look forward to hearing what they have to say. Each of our companies has a great deal in common. We're all major producers of power with lots of nuclear assets in our generating portfolios. We also have our differences in our corporate footprints, our operating characteristics, and business strategies, among other things. And I think those perspectives will help shape the differences in our conversation. So each of us is going to say a few words about our companies in particular and any topic they want to discuss for a few minutes, and then we'll talk among ourselves and we'll take questions from the audience. The four companies here, Dominion, Marv mentioned where I work, is the only one with a sizable natural gas footprint, so I'm going to talk about that issue. We have interests in natural gas processing, transmission, storage, as well as distribution. Our transmission and storage business is located in the Appalachian Basin, where we're building a lot of infrastructure to serve producers operating in the Marcellus and Utica shales. We also own the Cove Point LNG terminal on the Chesapeake Bay, which is about 150 miles from the Marcellus and Utica shales and less than 50 miles from where we sit this morning. We're one of about a dozen companies seeking regulatory approval to export LNG from that terminal to global markets. We plan on building a multi-billion-dollar liquefaction facility there that should be in operation in 2017. It'll export about 4.6 million tons a year of LNG, which we have fully subscribed for 20-year contracts to companies in Japan and India. We also have gas distribution companies in West Virginia and Ohio. And in 2012, all of our gas businesses together accounted for about 30% of our earnings. On the electric side, we have about 28,000 megawatts of regulated and merchant generating. About half of the fleet's 2012 output came from fossil fuels, split about evenly between natural gas and coal, which has been quite a shift in our production. A few years ago, it would have been much heavier with coal. We have 4 utility and 3 merchant nuclear facilities. 47% of our total generation last year came from nuclear, and about 2% from renewables. We recently had to announce the closing, the decommissioning of the Kewanee Nuclear Power Station in Wisconsin, merchant power facility. We were unable to find a way to run it economically, and happy to talk about that as we get into the Q&A period. Actually, I'm not happy to talk about it because it's a very unhappy decision to have to close what was a very fine operating facility purely for economic reasons. At the same time, we are looking at building a new nuclear power station using the GE Hitachi technology with Fluor as the contractor, about just under 1,500 megawatt plant that we would build near our North Anna reactors in Central Virginia. Natural gas has become the preferred fuel for power generation. This is not news to anyone. It's increasingly abundant and it is cleaner than coal. When I say it's becoming increasingly abundant, the statistics are rather amazing, actually. Production from shale formations today is about 1/4 of our gas reserves. By 2035, it will be half. It will double over that time. And the experts say we have at least 100 years of natural gas reserves throughout the United States. We are continuing to add gas-fired capacity to our system because of the fuel's favorable economics. By 2017, we expect gas use to grow by more than 40% over what it was just last year. So to capitalize on the strong global demand for LNG, we think it's important to start exporting natural gas, which will strengthen the natural gas infrastructure system in the United States thoroughly. And the rest of the world is not standing by idly while the United States gets its act together. The global LNG market is extremely competitive and growing more so by the day. The primary hurdle at the moment is the U.S. Department of Energy's approval of export licenses. Recent statements by the President, in fact, as recently as yesterday, gives us hope the DOE is again moving forward. The comment periods are concluded on their studies, and we're hopeful that they will start issuing permits in the very near future. So as important as natural gas is to our business, everything we know and preach about diversification and prudent risk management argues against making one fuel the only fuel for electric generation. Betting too heavily on natural gas, no matter how much it appeals to us, exposes consumers to supply disruptions, shortages, and price spikes, not to mention abrupt and unexpected shifts in regulatory climate. Fuel diversity is always the best policy. It is the all-hands-on-deck approach. It's also why we should be having policy discussions today about how we're going to replace 100 gigawatts of nuclear capacity that's going to be retired by 2040. 100 gigawatts will power 25 million typical households. Absent new coal-fired capacity, can we realistically expect natural gas and renewable energy to fill that void? As a practical matter, we believe the answer to that is surely no. And the generation of electricity is about as practical a business as it gets. We're going to need all of the generating options at our disposal because none of them alone will meet the projected 25% increase in power demand over the next 2 decades. I'm convinced that one of the biggest challenges our industry faces is to avoid being the victim of our own success. By doing our job so well for generations, by building our energy system with extraordinary ingenuity and reliability, we have helped create a take-it-for-granted mindset among the American public, with little understanding of what it actually takes to produce and deliver power on a massive scale. To make matters worse, the media, some politicians, and the more distant reaches of the environmental community have conditioned consumers to look for easy answers to very complex questions about energy, and to believe that we can somehow quickly transform our energy landscape and rely on wind, water, and sunshine to provide 100% of our energy needs. Those of us in our industry must do a better job of speaking out as realists. Our challenge is to overcome wishful thinking and provide the facts about what it will take to meet America's vast and growing energy demand and do so cleanly, reliably, and affordably. As the public conversation about America's future energy choices move forward, we have an obligation to improve the quality, substance, and realism of that conversation and make sure that it includes nuclear power. If Americans really want a low-carbon economy, then they better get to be very pro-nuclear, especially if they want to keep the lights on. We have to acknowledge that public policy has a long way to go to catch up with the 21st century. A coherent and comprehensive national energy policy has been on all of our wish lists for a long time. I have no illusions about the difficulty of creating such a plan, especially in the polarized and often paralyzed policy climate that pervades Congress. But the fact is, if we fail to get energy right, not much else is going to go right for our nation. We are, after all, a must-have energy society. We are not an energy optional society. We must begin treating energy, and electricity in particular, for what it really is. It is literally the world's most valuable commodity and the source of global prosperity. Now, that's all my prepared remarks, and then we'll start the discussion after each of my colleagues has a few minutes to speak, and I'll turn first to Tom Fanning.
Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Tom. Farrell's a great American. A lot of what he says, almost everything what he says, is absolutely right. The little nuance that I'll offer is just a different perspective rather than, say, a disagreement, I would say. I'm very public about my position on national energy policy, particularly electricity policy. I'm going to offer up two things. One is a Reader's Digest version of a speech I gave at the National Press Club in March that will basically speak to the highlights of what I believe we should be doing. You'll find very similar to what Tom just said. I'm going to finish with a little bit of a call to action with respect to how energy policy in the United States can be a way forward to play offense and otherwise a challenged economic environment. I think we have a real opportunity in America and in this hemisphere, North America, to really do something special and really not accept what is otherwise becoming this new normal that I just absolutely reject. So the Reader's Digest version of the speech, look, I think we don't have energy policy in the United States today. It's this patchwork quilt of one-off rules and regulations. It's pretty clear to me that we need to have three elements of a policy being held together, all the above. I've been talking for some years now about something we've been calling all the arrows in the quiver. If President Obama wants to use all the above and now everybody else adopts that language, fine. Let's say that. But whatever it means, it's the full portfolio. That's point one. Point two is we've got to adopt energy innovation as a national priority. And number three is we've got to restore America's financial integrity. That is critical to this business. A little bit more depth on each one of those three. The full portfolio: nuclear, 21st century coal, natural gas, renewables, energy efficiency. I'm going to blow through these. We can return to any of these elements on Q&A or any of the discussion we want to on the panel. Tom's right. We need to go forward on new nuclear. We're doing that at Vogtle 3 and 4. It is a national imperative. It is a dominant solution in what is otherwise kind of an unknowable, variable future that this nation faces. We do know that we can be successful with new nuclear. We've got to continue it. Number two, this nation is blessed with 28% of the world's coal reserves. Half of those reserves are high quality, and even the low quality reserves are things that we can use beneficially. We've got to find a way forward for coal in America. It is silly not to take advantage of that excellent resource that has served us so well for so long. And in fact, we're putting forward a technology in Mississippi right now that has a capital cost similar to nuclear, an energy cost similar to nuclear, clean, safe, reliable, affordable. We think we can go forward in an excellent manner this way. The United States must take advantage of its advantages. Number three, natural gas. I believe, like Tom does, that it is the dominant solution right now. Everybody loves natural gas. We do too. Southern Company is one of the biggest energy producers in the United States. And in fact, just to give you some scale, we're a little bit smaller, but similar in size to the nation of Australia in terms of electrons produced. Okay? So we're pretty big. What's interesting is about 6 years ago, we produced 70% of our energy from coal, about 16% from natural gas. Last year, we were 45% natural gas and only about 32% coal. So we have made this huge shift. We've cut coal in half and we've grown natural gas enormously. And we have a pretty good swing capability in the years ahead. We can take natural gas probably from 35 to 55% of our energy production, and we can swing coal somewhere between 45 and 25%. Both of those together will add up to about 80% any way you look at it, but we have the ability to swing based on what the fuel markets give us in the future. And one of the points Tom made I want to emphasize. While natural gas is a dominant solution, it is so attractive, it is not a panacea. If you want to go forward later, I can kind of cover this in detail, but there are at least 5 reasons why we should be cautious about natural gas. And in fact, last year I did a weekend interview in the Weekend Wall Street Journal where unfortunately the headline was "The Natural Gas Skeptic." Please understand, I am not a natural gas skeptic. My company has made a big bet forward on natural gas. We're the 3rd largest consumer of natural gas in the United States. So from a different perspective, we have a huge footprint in natural gas, but it's the footprint of a consumer. It is vitally important for us to get that policy right. That was 3. 4 are renewables. I share the same view that Tom does. Renewables are wonderfully exciting. Costs are coming down, but they are not the long-term solution. Certainly in the Southeast, in the near term, say by the end of the decade, they will remain a niche. Where there are great resources, there are few people. We must build transmission lines to get the resource to where the people are. It is an intermittent resource, and therefore what we've got to do is make sure that when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, we are able to provide a backup resource that's suitable to keep the electrons flowing. And then third, these resources get about 100 times the tax preference items that natural gas, coal, and 50 times that nuclear gets. So this industry exists because of our federal policy. I'm not sure how long we can afford that and how long it's wise to keep that in place. The 5th issue to me is energy efficiency. Energy efficiency does not mean it is the objective to use less. It is to use our resource more wisely. And therefore, I think what you find is a lot of people benefit in their lifestyles by using more electrons. They live in better homes, they get better medical care, they eat better, they educate their kids better. As our standard of living rises, electricity consumption rises, we should be for that. Energy efficiency allows people to use more of our product. It's a great thing. So the full portfolio, nuclear, 21st century coal, natural gas, renewables, energy efficiency, we're all for it. That's the first priority. Second priority, energy innovation is a national priority. We need to continue to invest in that. I think there are certain places that we should really emphasize. The United States government should take the role on the early research. We as an industry should do the scale-up commercialized research. When I say energy innovation, everybody translate that to smart meters and beyond the meter and all that stuff, smart homes. That's fun stuff. But let's start the notion of innovation with the conversion of a fuel stock to an electron, and then moving that electron, and then finally consuming it. Make, move, and sell is where we need to be innovative, not just sell and consume. The third area is restore America's financial integrity. Now, that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, but given the capital intensity of our industry, it's enormously important that we get this right. We consume as an industry about $90+ billion of capital a year. And right now we have overreaching regulation that is setting energy policy, where we all these CEOs right here are terrific CEOs in our industry. Every one of us takes seriously the obligation to provide clean, safe, reliable, affordable energy. When you look at an organization like EPA, they got clean. They do not have the capability to assess reliability nor affordability. We've got to have energy policy that takes into account the full portfolio of our obligation. And so therefore we need to reduce overreaching regulation. The second part of kind of restoring America's financial integrity is to do something about the national debt and restore our balance sheet. And I know the argument goes from Republican issues to Democrat issues. These are in fact essentially American issues. We need to reduce cost, reduce the overhead of the government. We need to think about tax reform. I'll get to that here in a minute. But I'm worried that if the answer is increasing taxes, that just serves to stymie further economic growth. We've got to be for growth. And one of the things I want you to consider is think about energy inputs in America as growth capital. Don't tax growth capital. Let's unleash the potential to grow this economy and grow jobs and grow personal incomes and make American lives better. The third part of just restoring American financial integrity is tax reform. I've been on record for a long time now. We need to completely redo this thing. Easier said than done. I'm afraid if all we do is a land war of trying to fight every tax rule and regulation and piece of law, we'll never get anywhere. We need comprehensive reform. We've got to get Congress acting in that regard. Final thing I want to leave you with is an opportunity, and it's a fascinating thing I've been working on. In my view, we can change a policy based on shortages, that's the principle, to one based on abundance. When you think about the critical role that nuclear can play in America, when you think about unleashing the potential with new technologies to produce more domestically produced oil, natural gas, And when you think about the sector that is electricity, that's growing faster, almost double the rate of the other sectors, of course gas is a big part of ours, then I think we have the opportunity by the end of this decade for North America to be energy secure. Now note, I don't say independent, but secure. That means being a net exporter. And that really changes the calculus. I think energy security breeds national security, and that breeds economic security. And in this malaise we find ourselves in, where people are talking about a new normal, which is unreasonably, unacceptably high unemployment, slow economic growth, I think what we can bring to bear in the world economic markets is an unassailable advantage to restart manufacturing in America, grow jobs, grow personal incomes, and make American lives better. I think we can do that. And I think maybe by 2030, 2035, this nation has the natural resources. When you think about some of the things Farrell said about the resources that we have available here, that I think we become the greatest energy producer on the globe. It's a wonderful opportunity, and I think we all play central roles in making that happen. Thank you.
Who wouldn't vote for that guy?
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. Let's go in reverse alphabetical order. And Chris, I know you have thoughts about renewable energy policy. For example, Tom mentioned that. So, Chris Crane, Exelon.
Sure. To follow on with what Tom said, Exelon was formed about 13 years ago, and at the time we were about 75% nuclear and had 13-14% coal. The rest was made up in renewables, hydro, biomass. As the market is adjusted over the last decade, so has Exelon. And today, we find ourselves selling electricity or natural gas in 47 states. Our biggest footprints are in the Mid-Atlantic, the Midwest, Illinois, New England, and growing in Texas. We built our business around clean, reliable generation in competitive markets. As we joke with our friend Mr. Fanning, we have to work for our living. But so the competitive market is definitely, did he laugh? No. The competitive market is definitely, the sustainability of the competitive market is definitely built on the market principles itself and how we compete within that market and how we choose our investments. In the last couple of years, we've seen a few things change. We've heard about the natural gas revolution, how fracking can be looked at as a good opportunity for the country, but also for investors in other generation sources, a disruptive technology. And making that adjustment is important for all of us. We too are a gas consumer. We're the largest purchaser of gas in New England. We have switched our portfolio now to be about 50% nuclear, 25% natural gas. We've increased our portfolio of renewables. We have over 2,000 megawatts and growing in that area right now. But as we've looked through to today in our balance sheet in the future, we find ourselves in a very challenging situation. Recently, we announced pulling back on the spend of over about $2.5 billion in investment in power uprates at our nuclear facilities, looking at more renewables and natural gas for a couple reasons. One is demand is down. The necessity to build new generation in our markets due to the economy or energy efficiency has had us pull back. But more importantly, what our decision was based on is the manipulation of the markets at this point with subsidizing generation. The first area and the most impactful are the production tax credits being continued for wind. As I said, we're a wind producer, we're a wind developer. We believe in the all in the above strategy that was discussed. But if you start to subsidize one over the other, there's unintended consequences. The renewable portfolio standards that were developed in the 30 states, that now they are state-level renewable portfolio standards, were put in place at a time that the legislative bodies and the regulators thought that load would be growing, and so if load was going to grow, having a portion of the generation coming from renewables sounded like the right thing. So arbitrary standards were set in place, and there really weren't goals behind it. How much carbon were we going to reduce? How much impact would there be on the environment from a cleaner source? It's just give a slice to the renewables as we grow. So a state like Illinois, when they set their renewable portfolio standard 20% by 2025, at that point they thought load was going to grow by 40%. The reality is today the load in that state is less than when the standard was set. So you have to make room for that generation to come on. What you've seen in the state of Illinois is in the last year, either every coal plant was either sold at a very low price, given away for the cost of the debt on the books, went through bankruptcy, or has been shut down. So coal is seeing a definite impact on these policies that are subsidizing generation to create to achieve a goal that really doesn't have a basis. Now, when you get to nuclear in that state, we'll just use as an example, we're seeing at approximately 14% of the time at a couple of our plants negative pricing on the bus. So essentially what we have to do is pay to keep those baseload nuclear plants up and running. That's not a sustainable model. We have one unit in the state that's one of our newer technologies, a BWR, that had a 0 force loss rate last year. The thing ran perfect. It's an operator's dream. But its economics do not look good going forward, and the site team with the corporate organization have looked at everything they can do to optimize that plant. We're never going to sacrifice capital or O&M for safety or reliability, but we have to be realistic. How long can you run a plant that's just eating money? The plant is now going to an annual refueling cycle, and for all of you operators, you understand going from a 24-month core to a 12-month core, the impact on the site and the operations, but that's what the economics are demanding right now. We are out of balance on subsidizing generation and trying to keep a baseload generation that's safe, reliable, and has some significant impact on the environment. So we've been very outspoken that 30 of the states have standards that are being subsidized by 50. It's not that the renewables are cheaper than any other generating source in the stack. It's just they're getting their revenue stream from different places instead of the competitive market itself. When you can have a nuclear plant being $10 negative on the bus when you're running, and the wind unit right across the street running and making $13 to produce, there's something out of balance, and that's what we've got to reel in. The other issue that has come up in our markets, and I think Tony will talk more about it, is subsidizing conventional generation. So we've got this competitive market. We're trying to figure out what to do with these plants and these investments that we're trying to make. And then a state comes up with the idea, well, wouldn't it be great to subsidize some generation on the conventional side, some gas or something else, so we can create jobs? That's not creating jobs, that's killing jobs. The $2.5 billion that we were going to invest was going to create some significant jobs. If it's building trades, if it's the local economy around with the craft coming in to do the upgrades, it's just needs to be recognized of the unintended consequences. So going forward, we believe in the competitive market, we believe in the clean technology, but we also believe that as this industry, we have to get our voices, both Tom said, we have to get our voice out there to let the public know the unintended consequences of subsidizing or over-subsidizing one source over the other. And I think the summary of that is if you over-invest in over-subsidize renewables, you are against nuclear. And if you're against nuclear, you're against the environment. It's the bottom line. It's the way the economics boil down, and it's something we really have to address.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate that. So Tony Alexander from FirstEnergy in Akron, Ohio.
Okay, let's chat a little bit. I think Both Toms painted a wonderful picture for the future, and I agree with everything they say. I think Chris brought us back a little bit in terms of the reality of what's actually going on in our markets today. What I'm going to do is suggest that if we don't embrace the type of future that they're talking about, and that's a future based primarily on growth, then where we are at and what we're going to have to deal with over the next few years is fundamentally different than most of our experiences. And I'll paint a picture for you a little bit about what's going on in the PJM markets. Probably one of the more robust, largest competitive market in the country. And while we talk about growth, kilowatt hour sales in PJM are lower today and expected to be lower today than they were in 2007. Now PJM is a big market. It's within 500 miles of 2/3 of the population of the United States. This is a big area, and we've got no growth through 2013, and PJM is expecting no growth through 2016 for their upcoming auction. There's a lot going on, and there are all types of opportunities, but the fact of the matter is if we're facing an industry that's not growing, much of what we talk about is going to be significantly challenged because the capital costs associated with almost anything we touch needs to be spread over more kilowatt hours to be affordable over the long term. And without growth, this industry is going to be significantly more challenged than it's ever been in the past. Chris talked about kind of a massive interference with the market. And I'm going to talk a little bit more deep about that in terms of about 3 or 4 aspects that are going on right now, all of which sound good. And quite frankly, one of the nation's most renowned economists has said that most everything in social history over the last 50 years or so has been substituting things that sound good for things that work. And I would suggest that much of what we're doing today and much of what we're facing in PJM is a continuation of what I describe as a massive and intentional government and regulatory sponsored interference with competitive markets. And I'll start with 3 or 4 different, give you a couple of examples. Energy efficiency. I agree with Tom. Energy efficiency is great. We've all been supporting it for all of our careers. It's not something that is contrary to what we believe. The problem with energy efficiency is, particularly in competitive markets, is that regulated utilities are using their ability to effectively tax customers to influence energy use. So in Ohio, for example, we have about 3% of the customers taking advantage of energy efficiency programs. 97% of the customers pay for it as a hidden charge on their bills. Almost $500 million have been spent in the state. We have to get to 22%. We're only at 2%. We have industrial customers paying $1 million a year for light bulbs for residential customers. Now that can't last, and it won't encourage growth if your state is essentially taxing where other states are not. Fundamentally trying to change the shape of the demand-supply curve by moving the whole curve downward, and it's only a question of how much money the utilities spend to effectuate kilowatt-hour usage. Now let's talk about demand response, another interesting concept. 50% of the reserve margin in PJM is now going to be satisfied by shutting customers off. I don't think any of us I know I certainly haven't in 40 years. Thank goodness I wasn't an engineer, so I didn't really understand the concept. But the idea of building an electric system around shutting customers off seems to be the wrong way to go about business. But that's exactly what we have right now in PJM, and it's worse than that. Because they can bid in this market, the auction, 3 years from now they don't have to bid. They can bid and they don't have to know where the demand response resource is. They don't even have to own it, and they can bid. And if they can't get it, they pay a 20% premium, penalty I should say. The market has to somehow come up with that differential. Again, a great idea, demand response. We've all had interruptible rates for years, but we never really designed the system around shutting customers off, which is where we're headed right now. The third is subsidized generation. The idea that a state will act like a regulated company and tax every person in that state in order to encourage the building of generation that is not needed in the market in order to effectuate the entire supply in the market. So in other words, increase supply, reduce price, make the customers in our state pay the differential, but they reduce the price in the entire market as a result of doing that. Fourth is renewable energy, same type of thing. The idea that we're bringing in supplies at night that are not needed, that affect the use of baseload power plants, change the shape of the supply-demand curve. Essentially, when you put all these things together, demand response is taken off the top of the curve, renewables are taken off the bottom of the curve, and energy efficiency is moving the whole curve downward. At the same time, we encourage capacity markets, and we'd like to see them developed. PJM has a fairly robust capacity market. But I would suggest to you that a market in which 67% of the participants bid zero as the value of their capacity, 87% bid less than $100 a kilowatt day, which doesn't cover depreciation, interest, taxes, is a market that's poised ultimately for collapse and does not support the significant amounts of capital that are required not only for environmental spends going forward, for new nuclear plants, for anything that's required in the market. But yet it gets distorted, and I won't take a shot at my regulated buddies in the room because they kind of know who they are. But when a regulated asset gets 100% of their capacity expenses covered because it's included in rate base and it's paid for, they get 100% of their O&M included in the rates they charge their customers. They get 100% of their fuel through fuel adjustment clauses. They can probably bid zero into a capacity market. They can probably bid zero into an energy market because everything's going to be paid by somebody else. Those are distortions that are occurring in the market each and every day. And they're the same type of distortion, if you will, if you'll go with me with this one, in which many competitive manufacturers face in this country, primarily in international markets, where China or Brazil or somebody decides steel ought to be subsidized by the state. They ought to recover all of their costs through some sort of state subsidy so that they can dump it into the United States at prices that keep jobs available in their local communities. Internationally, we protect steel companies and others from that type of activity. We don't do it in competitive markets. And if we don't begin to reshape how we think about competitive markets, then the opportunities for growth that we talk about, the opportunities to use the energy capability of this country as the catalyst for growth which I truly believe we are positioned to do, I think will fail. And much of it is because the uncertainty all of these things create. And quite frankly, I think it's an uncertainty that even the gas people don't fully understand. I was at a conference in Pittsburgh filled with all natural gas guys, and they were quite excited, just like Tom is, about the opportunity for natural gas production and use, and how it's substituting in terms of in the growth in the demand curve. And I suggested to them that if they use the utilities in the gas business the same way as they're using the utilities in parts of the electric business, not every part of the country is doing this, but some are, I would suggest to you that every gas utility in this country will be putting on new furnaces, high efficiency ones, new stoves, new water heaters, all new facilities paid for in the gas bill, the same way it's now paid for in the electric bill, to stymie the growth in the production of the development of our natural gas resources. I don't think anybody's calculated that yet, but it's only a question of when. And quite frankly, most of us will have spent all of our money before somebody decides, from a government standpoint, to use the ability of the utility to tax and to create public policy that is adverse to the production and development of our own resources. So uncertainty, lots of changing and moving parts right now in our industry. We have a bright future if we allow it, like Tom and Tom have suggested. We kind of get out of our way and allow it to move forward. Otherwise, we're going to be in some very difficult times. Okay.
Well,
I didn't think they'd clap on that one.
that was plain speaking. So we're at this is, I believe, a nuclear energy related conference. You can see all these nuclear things around here. So let's put nuclear into context here. We sat down sort of in the bifurcated way that the country is bifurcated in its electricity markets. So we got over here, we have our two almost entirely merchant generators. And then Tom is I guess not 100% because you have your unregulated arm, but it sells back to regulated utilities, right?
Even our unregulated has contract structures that mimic a regulated
right.
business.
And Dominion, so almost entirely in the four states in the Southeast. In our company is 5 years ago, we had 11,000 megawatts of merchant power and about 18,000 megawatts of regulated power. We now have about 3,500 megawatts of merchant power and 20,000 megawatts of regulated power, because we've been building regulated power, shrinking back from the merchant markets. Most recently exited merchant coal entirely and a little Midwest fleet we had of nuclear coal and natural gas. So we're in these different markets, and that may sort of direct the way we've been making these remarks. Tom is, of course, the only one among us that's actually building two nuclear power plants at Vogtle. And I'd like to have us address the prospects of new nuclear in these two different markets. I'm gathering, obviously you are doing it. Right. We are pursuing it. We don't have a license to do so yet. So talk about, Tom, the capital structure that you had to rely on. I read about DOE loan guarantees and I don't think that's ever quite final. I haven't seen it in the papers. Obviously, you know whether it is or not. And then I'd like to have Tony and Chris address you're withdrawing even up rates to nuclear plants, and then see what we have about access to the capital markets and what the difference in regulatory background makes to the prospects of replacing 100 nuclear power plants that are going to retire over the next 25 years. So Tom, let's start with you.
Crane and I talk about this all the time. the so-called organized markets that those two folks live in and that Tony talked about in great eloquence really don't support the ability to invest long-term capital in a short-term market. You go back to your old business school stuff, right? When we think about building nuclear power plants, that's arguably the highest capital, longest economic payback of any asset that probably exists in America. And you need to have a great deal of certainty over time. And in fact, given a 10-year permitting and construction period required to build new nuclear, you need that kind of certainty through construction. That is really not achievable in a merchant market. In a regulated market, you are able to plan for the full portfolio. In other words, we can look at an optimal solution over a series of decades for the benefit of our customers that balances nuclear, coal, gas, renewables, and energy efficiency, and we can deploy those investments in a rational way, all for the benefit of our customers. We don't make money on fuel. We make money on investing the capital and building it out. The structures that we have in place in Georgia with respect to Plant Vogtle are ones that give us some assurance of cash recovery through this 10-year construction period, and they have served the benefit of our customers so well. So much so that when we originally certified Plant Vogtle 3 and 4, we thought we would have about a 12% price increase. With a lot of benefits that we've accrued since that certification, now we estimate to be over $2 billion. We're going to bring those units in, we believe, at between 6 and 8% price increases, well below the original investment. Now, cheap capital markets have helped, good contracts have helped, but a good regulatory environment, a good supportive legislature, good governor, and actually we've had good support at the national level too. All of those things have worked to make it work well. I think when you think about any of the high capital investment items, nuclear, coal especially, and even some natural gas, you need that kind of environment, I think, to succeed.
Chris?
The competitive market, as Tom said, it's very difficult to make that long-term investment, to see the predictability in the market. Although PJM has a good capacity market, as Nick Akins continues to point out, 3 years is not long enough to make that long capital decision. So we had done a lot of modeling at Exelon on new units. We have an early site permit for a plant in Illinois. We're proceeding to do a COL in the 2007 and 8 time frame in Texas, when there was some thought that there would be a price on carbon. At the federal level, there was a bipartisan conversation going on at the time when those could happen. The model said you needed a long-run natural gas of $8 an MMBTU and a carbon price at $25 on entry and escalating at a nominal couple percent year by year. That gave you the predictability in the market to be able to put in that large capital-intensive investment. The market changed. First, the recession came in, demand collapsed. The natural gas, as we've talked about, price and abundance has changed the market fundamentals, and continuing on that is the suppression of energy prices within the market on the subsidized electricity costs. You look at Texas and ERCOT as an example, they're coming very close to reserve margins being at a dangerous level, but the cost of energy is being suppressed by excess wind online, and that makes it hard even to invest in a natural gas plant right now, which is needed. So there has to be some adjustment in long-term capacity prices or some federal market design if it's an all and above for the competitive market to work. It has gotten to the point, as I said, that we've even had to pull back on power up rates. Since Exelon's inception, we've put on more than 1,800 megawatts, a plant in almost a half of new megawatts through our power uprate program. We are proceeding through a project that was announced a couple of years ago that 1,200 megawatts would be, 12 to 1,400 megawatts would be added through the extended power uprates. We're completing one at our Peach Bottom plant right now with our partners at PSEG, but we have suspended the projects at Limerick and at LaSalle because of market forwards and not being able to recoup our investment due to the current market conditions. So in the near term, it is not positive for significant investments in the technology. We're trying to hold on and maintain the assets as safe and reliable as they possibly can be to make it through whatever market corrections come up. As we look at Exelon at the future with this design of market, we see the shorter capital cycle and the potential advantage of an SMR being the only thing that could come in and save the day. But this is as a decade or so away as demand comes back up, as market prices, the levelized cost of energy gets more in line with the demand curve and the different technologies that are out there in the all-above strategy. So we see that is really the only potential. We could not bet our balance sheet on a 10-year investment cycle and the dilution that would create. And so at some point, as Tom and I talk about, it does indict the competitive market the way it's currently designed for the sustainability in an all and above future, but it's something we're going to have to attack.
I just got to jump in. Look, you run one of the great nuclear companies in America and some of the greatest assets in America. It is unconscionable to me that we are going to shut down some of those plants or not invest in them as we can based on a mismatch of duration of cost, long-term cost recovery, versus short-term market. It is a fundamental misdesign of a market that doesn't serve America's interests. We need to preserve a market structure that helps nuclear survive.
Tony.
Oh, I agree with Tom. I agree with Chris. I think there's another factor when it comes to competitive nuclear power plants, and that is, a big part of, I think, why Tom was able to reduce the overall cost of his project was because he was able to rely on very favorable bond and interest markets. Mm-hmm. Now, a utility can basically borrow at maybe 55%, maybe even go as high as 60% debt if they choose to, but in that kind of range, 50, 55% is pretty solid. Competitive companies are looking at debt probably in the 30 to 40% range. So 10 to 20% of your capital requirements are going to have to be satisfied with equity as opposed to debt to begin with. That creates the significant dilution that Chris was talking about going forward. So just the basic structure of the market and the much higher risk parameters associated with that market that the credit rating agencies are putting on create significant barriers to large capital projects that have extended life for bringing online. That's why I agree with Chris that perhaps down the road the small modular reactors can be effective in competitive markets only because they can be brought to market faster, hopefully, at a lower upfront capital cost, probably higher if you think about 1,500 megawatts of them as opposed to 200 megawatts or 250 megawatt blocks, but timed better with your ability to incorporate those into competitive markets. Otherwise, I don't see at this point much opportunity in competitive markets for large-scale nuclear plants.
So, Tony, you mentioned that the demand, I think you said, was lower is lower today than it was in 2007 or 2008 I guess in Ohio, or maybe across your whole company.
Yeah, that's Ohio, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, West Virginia, and Maryland.
Okay, and Chris, you mentioned that demand was lower in Illinois. They expected 40% load growth over a certain period of time when they set up their renewable portfolio standard. We have this confluence of low capital costs through at least on the interest side, through debt offerings that all of us can take advantage of, more so in growth markets perhaps than that Tom and our companies are in. But we have that going on. We have this demand stagnating, and that's really what I'm going to get to, these combinations and where it's heading. And then we have this extraordinary find of natural gas. So you have very low input price for at least one of the fuels, traditional fuels. You mentioned $8. Post-Katrina, it was $13, $14 a million cubic feet of gas. And there was $8 gas throughout 2006, 7, 8, and then started to decline along with the economy. So we have low demand growth. We have very low gas prices that will probably stay low in this area where they are now for an extended period of time. We have very low interest rates, which I think translates to, in these markets that you all are discussing, to little pain to the consumers. The pain is being felt by the producers of the electricity. Little pain to the consumers. That's not usually a formula for big regulatory or political changes to a market. So where is this heading? What will it take to change these markets? It's quite obvious, I think, at least to the four of us, and I expect everybody's listening, that the kind of marketplace that you're doing business in does not support the building of new generation that's going to be reliable baseload generation for many, many years. So what is going to cause a change in that market structure? It's not, California was the disruption that happened in California that led to Gray Davis's being turned out of office, et cetera, was extreme pain that was felt immediately by the consumers. This pain is being not felt by consumers, it sounds like. What's going to change that?
There is no opportunity to invest right now because the demand is not there. We do have an overcapacity of conventional generation, and that overcapacity is continuing to be hampered by the subsidized generation coming in, the intermittent subsidized generation coming in on top of it. If we can get back to the point of investment, we need a couple things. One, load growth, and two, to Tony's point, is not an overdependence on demand response in the market design, so that the market design has to be adjusted for that. We have to allow volatility back into the market. Volatility is, we sell our power in the competitive market, in the way the profits come are in points of bets that you make on volatility, and that's out of the market right now. And the last point is subsidizing generation. When do we get to California? That could be within a decade in this market. And it will happen very quickly. We'll have a blowout in PJM on either zones or a larger RTO on the capacity market. That will show that that we have pushed out mostly coal, some nuclear, out of the market. It will be looking forward 3 years, and you'll see that pop in the capacity market where the cost of new entry signals will come in, massive impact to the consumer, and then that usually correlates to some kind of regulatory adjustment where subsidized generation comes back in. So you can see a vicious cycle there. You know, you look at California itself today and what they're doing to themselves, and our PGE and Southern Cal Edison can speak to it better, but the way the market's being manipulated with the renewable portfolio standard in California, there's some analysts that have done some curves that you're going to see in a few years negative pricing coming in during the middle of the day because of excess solar and some intermittent wind at that point, and you're seeing a market that has to adjust its design to ramp to pick up that capacity with natural gas over about a 3-hour period. Over half of the load is going to have to come back up on natural gas. It's a totally different design market, and who gets crushed in that is that base load nuclear or coal operator. So a lot of work to do in a competitive market. Just one thing is let it be competitive, and I think that could help.
But you know what's weird about that? So both of you guys said something very interesting. You talked about the riskiness of a merchant market and kind of and therefore how much leverage you can afford. You just talked about the need for volatility to make the market work well. Volatility does not serve the American economy well. Energy inputs into manufacturing processes, or for example, 48% of my customers make less than $40,000 a year. They don't want volatility. They want predictability, reliability in energy prices. Here again, it's a market design issue. You're absolutely right in terms of what's good for Exelon. I'm not sure that market serves the interests of the American economy.
Yeah, the volatility doesn't go to the consumer. It goes to who's putting a hedge on it. It's the supplier takes the volatility. That's where the bet goes. That's where your margin is. We were selling power with margins of $5 a megawatt hour. We're selling power at margins of $1 a megawatt hour. Making that bet, it dampens the volatility. It's not the Wild West like California was. And who paid for it in California? It wasn't the consumers. It was where they almost bankrupt the utilities. So
did bankrupt one of them.
Yeah, did.
And look at prices now. The consumers are paying for it.
But actually, in competitive markets, from a retail standpoint, it's probably less volatile than a regulated market. There's no fuel adjustment clause. There's no renewable energy adjustment clause. There's no clause once you sign your contract that changes that price. Now, that price can be fixed for a year, it can be fixed for 2 years, it could be fixed for 7 years if you choose to go out that farther. I don't think there's a regulated company in America that's guaranteeing a price for 7 years without a fuel price, without a fuel adjustment, without any other charge associated with it. So from a retail customer standpoint, depending on how long they want to lock in their terms, they can be protected against even fuel adjustment clauses, which typically in most states used to be 6 months. I don't know where they're at right now, a year or every 6 months they get adjusted out.
Different stuff.
Up, down, and around. You don't see that in competitive markets if in fact you have a contract with a retail supplier.
Yeah, it's hard to debate this around the pros and cons of regulated or competitive, but the reality is the consumers in the competitive market that have switched have about 25 to 30% lower electric costs today than they did 2 years ago. Now, who pays for that? The ones that are trying to make the investment to go forward. It's the consumers it works out well. Now, what's going to happen a decade from now, that's another question.
That's the issue.
Yeah, because they probably 2 years ago, they probably had signed contracts 2 years before that, or at least a year before that.
Right.
And the energy prices have gone down and down and down and down. So and are they now at a bottom? Gas seems to be stabilizing in the high threes, sort of, as you look out in this forward strip. It's 350, 375, and a few spikes here and there. Gas prices last week, or 2 weeks ago, I guess, after the storage report, went up like 5%, 6% in an afternoon. Next day, they went down 3%. So that's the kind of volatility that makes a more traditional electric utility a little nervous about using nothing but natural gas. Because that is a traditional, it's happened over and over again in the energy market, in the gas markets, but with much less frequency today than in the past. And that may be because there is just an ocean of gas, and it's not located in just one region anymore. It is in many regions. The basis differentials that used to exist from the southwest markets into the northeast markets is almost gone.
But Tom, I would argue that this is the point of years ahead, and that's the point. Our business, the electric utility business, is built on decades of clean, safe, reliable, affordable. What we're facing, I think, right now, absent a sane national energy policy, is always betting on the next incremental generation resource, which is likely to be natural gas, and then augmented by renewables as the states see fit. And I think, without going into the 5 points, I think the United States in 2011 consumed on the average about 67 BCF per day. I think by the end of this decade, we could be 80 to 100. What we're building in is structural volatility, I think, into the energy complex, at least in terms of electricity. I don't think that serves our interests well. That's why we need the full portfolio.
You're right today, but the next disruptive technology that will come in is economic storage, and then central generating stations will be dinosaurs.
I would go to distributed generation, maybe.
Yeah, with distributed generation. We could
probably
debate
the
net
two in
metering.
combination to
Yeah.
really disrupt central power
I'm
stations.
with you. I'm with you.
Yep.
So this is really uplifting.
Anybody want to buy some stock?
Hey, no, I think there is a positive
This
story
is
here.
really great
No,
to
I know.
sit up here with my 3 colleagues. Now I understand why they wanted to sit out in the audience at the beginning. So we have a few minutes left. Do we have questions from the audience? We have just under 10 minutes left.
We're going to need a flashlight.
I think they may have been collecting written
Maybe, yeah.
questions. Thank you. Okay. This follows along the line of what Tony was just talking about. Does fuel cost pass-through reduce the utility's interest in nuclear power plant construction? So, Tom, you're building one now. What would your answer to that be?
No, you need the full portfolio. So when we think about baseload generation, they tend to have high capital cost, low energy cost. When you compare the energy costs coming out of Vogtle 3 and 4, we think it'll be about $1 per million BTU compared to $4 per million BTU on natural gas today. When you look at Kemper County, it's going to be $1 to $1.25 based on what oil is. The value of the CO2 is indexed against oil prices. So it'll be kind of in that range. So you need them both, right? You need exposure to kind of low capital and high energy. You need exposure to high capital and low energy. That's what makes a sane portfolio, just like your stock portfolios that you own personally.
Any other thoughts?
Totally agree.
Here's one. It's actually directed at Dominion, and the question is about whether we considered keeping Kewaunee operating license active so it could be restarted when these markets settle out, if they settle out or when they settle out. Kewaunee's a little bit different. We've been talking a lot about PJM. Kewaunee's actually in the market just to the west of PJM, MISO, which doesn't have a capacity market at all. At least PJM has a capacity market. We have power stations. Now, the only merchant stations we have left are in New England. 2 of them are in New England. 1 is in eastern PJM. New England also has a capacity market. The way the economics of it worked, and I'm not going to get into the details of the numbers, but structurally, we bought Kewaunee in 2005. I had a long-term power purchase agreement with it. Seemed like a long-term power purchase agreement with it at the time, which expires in 2013. And the economics of the plant were very sound with that, and it's a sweet plant. It's a wonderful plant. It almost has always gone breaker to breaker, from refueling to start winding it down, bringing it down to refuel it again. Fantastic plant. Very important part of the economy of the part of Wisconsin that it's in, eastern Wisconsin. But as the power purchase agreement was expiring, we turned back to the utilities that we had original power purchase agreement to see if they were willing to extend. They were not, and we worked at it, but all of us worked at it for a long time. They had perfectly sound reasons not to want to extend. So we then turned to all the other utilities in the upper Midwest to see if they would be interested in it. No. Then we said, would you buy it with the power purchase agreement associated? So we tried that for a while. That couldn't get anybody to do offtake. So then we said, all right, let's sell it as a merchant nuclear power station. Not a single bidder showed up. Not a single bidder came to demonstrate any interest in this plant that had just been relicensed. It runs extremely well, but it's a single unit plant. It's in a market that has no capacity support for it, and where you have, Chris has described very well the challenges in PJM markets on a single unit or small nuclear plants. So Kewaunee, we didn't see any way forward with it other than to decommission it. We did it with great reluctance, particularly because of the impact on the employees and the economy of the region there. So we tried, I can assure you, we tried everything we could think of for an extended period of time to extend the license and operating life of that plant, but we were just unable to.
We looked at it as we look at everything in the market. In our back of the envelope, you would have had to pay us over $100 million to take it. That's how bad the MISO market is now.
Give it to you.
You got to pay them.
With the $100 million check, we'll take it. We're on that thing with $100 million on
They're
top.
fantastic employees. It's
Yeah.
a great plant, Chris.
We can hire them away for free. I think we're already starting the recruiting.
Thank you.
We appreciate you training them for us.
Okay. Let's see here. Low gas, we've just touched on this a little bit. We now have these very low gas prices, or what have been, although, 15 years ago, gas was $2 in MCF, just forever. It looked like a dead patient's EKG. It was $2. And so now, but maybe it's stabilized, maybe it hasn't. What happens, so if and when gas prices start increasing, which they will at some point, I guess, I think, whether it's EPA regulations make fracking a little bit more difficult, whatever happens, interest rates start going up. The natural gas producers are cash flow businesses. They don't like debt. They tend to stop drilling, but they go in these. Traditionally, you had boom and bust cycles associated with this. This seems to be sort of in an equilibrium, at least for now. When gas prices start increasing, Chris, and you may have touched on this. You sounded to me like you said maybe this decade something could happen, but it's going to be sort of a sudden shock. It sounded to me like it was your view of it.
On the capacity market, yeah.
How will that play out?
So right now, I think if you look at AEP's, the generation for last year, you can see that we're hitting with the gas demand right now, the overall industrial gas demand, not only just power generation, we're hitting that sweet spot between coal and gas going back and forth, what's on the margin. And, as gas a couple months ago on the spot was hitting that 425 number, we saw a whole lot more coal come on, gas came back down, so we have that throttling point right now. What we'll need to see is gas consumption in other industrial parts of the different sectors come up, and then that will raise the demand, and we should see gas prices recover. What we think is a potential for the shock is not as much on the energy cost, it's the capacity component. When the lower cost gas, which we all have to compete against something that is truly competitive, which is natural gas, when the lower cost gas and the subsidized generation continues to push out good conventional generation, if that's coal or nuclear, then there's going to be a point on the annual capacity evaluation that we're going to see a blowout by region on demand. So right now, the RTO could settle at $100, 120, whatever the number is. We keep pushing generation out because of this market issue, and you're going to start to find that marginal generator inputting their capacity bid that's going to be significantly higher, and that will cause the issue.
It could roll into energy markets, because I'm not sure we fully appreciate what's going to happen when a lot of generation gets shut down in 2015 that's still operating. And the movement that you're seeing between natural gas and coal is probably more on marginal coal-fired plants that probably ought to be shut down anyways and will likely be shut down in 2015 because of MATS. It's not really affecting how you're operating a big baseload supercritical coal-fired facility. So as that side of the market clears out, and we get a better sense for what's going to be actually available in 2015 and beyond, and how those trade-offs are going to be made, we could see a lot more pricing set by natural gas in many more hours without that transfer between otherwise coal-fired generation. Because all the stuff that's on the swing right now is going to be shut down. We've shut down most of ours. The only thing left running is units that PJM was requiring us to run, but there's still a lot out there that needs to be shut down and will be shut down.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Chris Crane, Tony Alexander, Tom Fanning. Thank you all very much for participating today.
Nice job.